When the iPad Air came out, a lot of folks asked, why would I want an iPad Pro? And that's a great question, but with the release of the new iPad Pro, the differences are more pronounced. Today, we're going to be breaking all of that down. Hello, my name is Brad and I review tech for creative professionals, and I'm looking at iPads today, mainly through the lens of illustrators and designers. And I have no problem recommending the iPad Air or the iPad Pro. Both are great, but if you're having trouble deciding which one is right for you, you're in the right place. Let's set the scene. Apple currently sells a good number of iPads. Here's the lineup, top to the bottom. iPad Pro comes in two sizes, 12.9 inches and 11 inches. Spec-wise, they're very similar. The main difference is the display. The prices of these are $799 for the 11-inch and $1099 for the 12.9 inch. Then we have the iPad Air, Apple's middle-of-the-line iPad. That's $599. Then there's the little iPad Mini, which is the odd one out because it's been a while since it's been refreshed, but it starts at $399. And then at the bottom of our lineup, we have the iPad. It's currently in its 8th generation, and this is the entry level. This iPad starts at $329. Let's start by taking a look at this new iPad Pro. This is the model Apple likes to throw everything into, and this year, the big thing that they threw in there is the M1 processor. This is the same processor that Apple is putting into all of their new Macs. This iPad also gets the better camera setup and a LiDAR sensor packed in there too. On the 12.9-inch iPad, you get the Liquid Retina XDR display. This takes a lot of the tech that they developed for their Pro XDR display, the big expensive one, and squeezes it down into its iPad form factor. Where this really shines is in displaying HDR content. The contrast is fantastic. I talked about the inner shadow effect that you get along the edges of the screen in my review. It's subtle, but it's definitely noticeable. This display is also 120 Hz, but what about that 11-inch iPad? I mentioned that that display is a little bit different. It's using the older 120 Hz ProMotion display, and it's not that bad of a display. In fact, it's very good. Another thing to take note of is the USB-C port on the Pro has Thunderbolt. So if you're going to be moving data like large files regularly to and from your iPad, you're probably going to want that Pro model. You've got 4 stereo speakers, and the Pro is the only iPad that you can unlock using nothing but your face. They call it Face ID. It scans your mug. Now across the board, the iPad Air takes a step down. First, we start with a 60 Hz refresh rate on the display. This also doesn't have the same high-end camera setup, and it has an A14 Bionic processor, which is actually pretty good. It only has 2 stereo speakers, and instead of Face ID, it has a fingerprint reader on the on and off button along the top, which I really like. So when we're looking at the Pro and when we're looking at the Air, one thing that I would point out is all of the features that the Pro has are nice to have for art and illustration, but they aren't totally necessary. The one upgrade that most artists would appreciate the most is that ProMotion 120 Hz display. That higher refresh rate is going to give you smoother animations and, in theory, a smoother drawing experience. It's nice to have that higher refresh rate, but that's not the most important factor when we're talking about brush lag. What is the most important factor is how well optimized the software is, and the speed of many iPad drawing apps really excel here. For example, the lowest end iPad, the 8th gen iPad, the lag is almost imperceptible when drawing in Procreate. Some people love those 120 Hz displays, and I get it. I must have bad eyes though, because I can barely tell the difference. I have to look for that refresh rate in order to see it. I also use a lot of display tablets that hook up to PCs and Macs, and any iPad is just going to absolutely demolish those when it comes to brush lag. So when you stack up the new iPad Air directly against the current iPad Pros, you don't get all the bells and whistles. But what the Air does have is a newer A14 processor. This is very similar to the M1 processor that you're going to find in the new iPad Pro. The A14 is using the same processing cores, but there are less of them. 6 CPU cores and 4 GPU cores. And on the M1, you're getting 8 of each. What this means is that for single core processing tasks, these are almost the same. But for multi-core processing tasks or more graphics heavy workloads, that stuff is where the iPad Pro is going to beat the Air by a good margin. If you're doing video editing or 3D rendering, the Pro is the better choice, but for drawing, it's not much of a factor. What is a factor is RAM, and a good measuring stick for that is the app Procreate. Procreate always keeps its performance snappy by limiting how many layers you can have based on how much RAM your iPad has. I think this is the biggest factor to consider when you're looking at one of these new iPads. So my base level for judging this sort of thing is to make a canvas the size of the iPad Pro screen. That's 2,732 pixels by 2,048 pixels. So when we're looking at that size, we'll look at all the iPads here. You're getting 31 layers on that starter 8th gen iPad. You're getting 91 layers on the latest iPad Air. That's a fair number of layers for a good canvas size. How many are you getting on the new iPad Pro? That I'm not sure about yet. Procreate hasn't updated their app. But if we're talking about 50% more RAM, theoretically, we can assume we're going to get about 50% more layers, so around 180 layers at that canvas size. But here's where it gets kind of nutty and fun. If you have an iPad Pro with 1 terabyte or 2 terabytes of storage, that M1 chip that they're putting in there has 16 gigabytes of RAM in it. So you could be getting somewhere in the neighborhood of 360 layers at that canvas size. So in recent years, in many of these videos, I've talked about the RAM as being one of the limiting factors on the iPad, but we've really hit the point where, honestly, I think looking at these layer limits is going to be a thing of the past just because they're getting so high and the canvases are getting so large in terms of what you could do that it's just not going to matter anymore. One question I see in the comments, and I get on Twitter a fair amount, is the question, well, I think the Air will be good enough, but I'm not sure how many layers I need. And my general rule of thumb is if you don't know how much power you need, you probably don't need that much. The people who are working with huge canvases know they're working with huge canvases and working with a lot of layers. They know what they need. So I would say you're probably safe going with the Air. Let's talk about this Apple Pencil. This is a game changer for me. This is why both of these devices, the Air and the Pro, are winners and why I can so easily recommend them. I love that second generation Apple Pencil. Keep in mind, the Apple Pencil is an extra accessory and it's not cheap, but I wholeheartedly recommend that you pick one of these up instead of a third-party stylus. This is one area where you don't want to skimp. It is a phenomenal stylus. Since this is the Apple Pencil 2, you might be thinking naturally that, hey, this must be better in some way than the Apple Pencil 1, but really the only difference between these two pencils is the way they charge. The drawing experience is pretty much the same. And the reason I love the Apple Pencil 2 is just the convenience of it all. The way it stores along the side of your iPad and charges while it's there, instead of always having to remember to plug it in and charge it up. It really does make a difference in your workflow. Quality of the Apple Pencil is the same on all iPads. So it's not like you're all of a sudden getting better drawing experience on the Pro than you are on the Air. It's identical no matter where you're going to be using the pencil. To get the most out of the Apple Pencil, I use a screen protector on my iPad. A paper-like screen protector, in fact. They are the sponsor of this video. Paper-like is a matte screen protector for your iPad that gives you so much more drawing control. No more slick plastic pencil on a smooth glass screen. It even sounds like paper. You can get Paper-like for any size iPad, the cute little iPad mini all the way up to the giant iPad Pro. There is a link down in the description where you can get yours today. Also, before you go, they have some free Procreate brushes up on their site. A whole set of them. I'll link those down below in the description too. All of these iPads have great screens, but there are some differences. The cheapest iPad doesn't have a laminated screen, and there's a bit of a gap between the glass and the screen below it. Does this affect your drawing ability? Not really. It can affect accuracy if you're not looking at your iPad straight on, if you're at a slight angle or something like that, but it's not horrible. But when you jump up to the iPad Air or the iPad Pro, you're gonna see that laminated screen is gonna look and feel a lot nicer. So what are the differences between the Air screens and those higher end iPad Pro screens? The first is that faster refresh rate that I mentioned earlier, meaning this display goes from 60 Hz to 120 Hz. This is going to give you smoother animations and transitions, and when I put both iPads side by side, I could definitely tell the difference, but I'm gonna be completely honest with you here, unless they're sitting next to each other or unless I'm specifically looking for it, I don't really notice it. Probably because my eyes are getting old. So yes, It is smoother. Yes, there isn't as much lag on the pen, but usually, like I tell people, if I need to slow down my camera speed so you can see lag, it ain't a problem. This is not the thing that's going to help you make better art. It's just a nice to have feature. I mentioned this before, but the 12.9-inch iPad Pro has an HDR screen, so the contrast is greater and it's better than that 11-inch Pro screen. But like I said in my review, unless I'm looking for it, I can't really see it. This is a perfect example of the law of diminishing returns. On paper, it is a better display, but when you get it into the field and actually use it, are you gonna notice? Maybe, maybe not. I think it's great if you're working with video, HDR video, or if you're working with photos and you want that super high contrast. But for art and illustration, again, it's just nice to have. So which iPad should you get? So if price is the main thing that you're looking at, don't feel bad about the Air because I think it is absolutely fantastic. In fact, I think for most illustrators, the iPad Air is probably exactly what you need. The compromises that that particular product is making are pretty minimal for what you're getting. Now, if you don't have a budget and you want all that extra power, or you just really want the larger screen, then go Pro. I'm really intrigued by what Procreate is doing, being able to paint on 3D models in their upcoming release. I think that's really interesting. If that's the kind of stuff that you want to do on the iPad, then maybe going with the Pro model is the way to go. Shout out to the cheap entry-level iPad here, though. I've said this in other videos, but I think that entry-level iPad is an incredible value for its price. It's hard to think of anything at this price point that is as good. For $429, I'm including the price of the Apple Pencil in this calculation, you aren't just getting a screen you can draw on, but a fully blown functional computer, and you can find cheaper pen displays out there in the mid 200s to 300 range, but for a little more, you can just get something that doesn't need to be plugged into a wall. Plugged into a computer, is totally mobile. Not to mention that the Apple Pencil is one of the best drawing digital pens around. Now, the downside of that cheapest iPad is storage. It only has 32 gigabytes, and that's gonna fill up pretty fast. You can upgrade, purchase additional storage for your iPad, but that boosts the price up by another $100 because Apple. Other question I get is size. Is it worth jumping up to that 12.9-inch size? That's the size I really like drawing on. I like a larger screen. You know, I think it comes down to personal preference. A lot of people draw on the smaller iPads because they're not that small. 11 inches is actually pretty good size. And drawing interfaces and app interfaces tend to be pretty minimal on the iPad, especially if you're using something like Procreate. So that's not really a problem like it is on the desktop with smaller display tablets. If you're interested in drawing on something really small, there's the Mini. However, I haven't really covered that too much in this video because it's ancient in tech years. It's using a very old processor, hasn't been updated in a while, and so that's a little harder to recommend at that price point, even though it's kind of nice because it's so small and so portable. So what do you think? Let me know down below in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and I'll talk to you in a couple of days.